So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for making it here today. And it's such a pleasure to be here discussing such an important topic about fathers and mental health, especially considering the cultural and socioeconomic aspects that relate to the subject matter. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce the founding director of the Brain and Mind Institute, Professor Zul Merali, and he's going to do the welcomes and then we'll take the program from there. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Candy. Greetings to all of you. It's welcome to this roundtable discussion on men's mental health. You can hear me okay? Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of unspoken influence of the culture on mental health, as you know, and particularly for masculinity. I'm Zul Merali. I'm the founding director of the Brain and Mind Institute, and the Institute is very proud to support today's event because for the Brain and Mind Institute, this is really an important area that we would like to address surrounding men's mental health. Our culture expects men, as you know, to be stoic about it, to kind of suck it up and march on. And as a consequence, many men will not seek help for mental illness or mental well-being. Men continue to take their lives in large numbers. In Kenya, it's a major issue, as it is in many countries of the world. And these numbers are actually increasing. And what's important to realize is that there is a very strong link between suicidal behavior and depression. And I'm delighted to see you all so much interested in this topic. I think this was a record-breaking enrollment in this webinar. We had over 900 people, which is really quite amazing. So welcome everybody from so many places of the world. And I'm also delighted to tell you that 70% of the registrants are men. So finally, men are beginning to open up a little bit. We have people from Uganda, Karachi, UK, Australia, Canada, and many more countries. A special thank you to the panelists from our communities, from academia, from the houses of worship, as well as the community. And so we really thank you very much for making the time for this. I would like to now introduce Professor Alex Awiti. He's our esteemed Vice Provost, and he's going to be the moderator of the webinar. And as you can see from his bio, he is really a transdisciplinary researcher. He has worked in the areas of agriculture, of society, of populations, health policy, economy, and as a public intellectual, he's written well over 730 opinion articles that have been published in leading Kenyan newspapers, in international publications, including, certain, I got my notes mixed up. I don't want to say wrong things about Alex because I'll have to face the consequences after. So he has published about 730 newspaper articles, publications, including International Policy Digest and the Conversation. And he has also been the speaker at the TEDx Nairobi in 2013 on public policy issues on news networks in East Africa and international media such as CNBC, CGTN, Bloomberg News, as Al Jazeera TV, etc. So he's very well accomplished, and we're very proud of other accomplishments that Alex has navigated for us. For instance, like in 2021, the university got its charter, and Alex was really steering this whole initiative. And so our university owes a debt of gratitude to Alex for having navigated those difficult conversations with the government of Kenya. So without further ado, Alex, take it away.
Thank you very much. So these introductions usually sound like eulogies, except you're not dead. So you like showing up at your funeral alive. But thank you very much for the very generous introduction. And good afternoon, and I might say good morning, because I know there's many people watching or participating in this online. It is really my pleasure to moderate this very interesting and unique conversation. And I guess for the first time, I'm sitting in a panel, and I'm not embarrassed that there's no ladies on the panel, because this is about men's mental health and fathers. And I'm so delighted that 70% of the participants, people watching and will be participating, are men. And I guess one of the things that we kind of want to come out of here is that the men listening to this discussion will raise sons not like them, because we've got to do something different. As Zul says, and we'll hear in the discussion, I think there's got to be a paradigm shift. There's got to be men coming out, and we'll get into that. So I would like at this point to introduce my panel members, and I'll start with Farid, Diamond Khimani. Farid needs no introduction if you're Kenyan, but I'll just say a few things about him. He's a presenter and radio host at Capital FM. Farid is a mental health advocate, and he is also a sports presenter. He began to present Capital in the morning and took his unique brand of radio to a number of other stations before running Capital FM. Our next panel member is Pastor Simon Mbevi, and I think for many Kenyans too, he is no stranger. Simon is the founder and executive director of Transform Nations, an organization that seeks to be a catalyst for community transformation through encouraging training in transformational leadership, family, especially responsible masculinity. And I'm going to be talking about masculinity a lot this afternoon. So he has his organization runs a program across many nations, with the foremost being Man Enough, which has been taken by almost 40 men. I think being man enough is another problematic construct that I think we'll be talking about today, because it really goes to a lot of some of what Zul was referring to. I'm also really delighted that we have Imaam Salim Maina Charo. He's a member of the National Muslim Leaders Forum. He's a board member and advisor of the Islamic Matters Agents of Peace. He's a head teacher at Darul Islam Madrasa, Medina Center in Baghdadi, on Baghdadi Way. He's a former chairman of the Council of Imams and Preachers of Kenya. He was also in charge of the Mosque Reopening and Compliance Committee of Nairobi, and the Trainer of Trainers, the National Muslim COVID-19 Response Committee. Welcome. Last but not least is my good friend and colleague, Professor Lukoye Atwoli, who will also, apart from being the Dean of the Medical College, is an Associate Director working with Zul in the Brain and Mind Institute. Again, Lukoye doesn't need a lot of introductions, and he is really our scientific expert on this panel. And he's also a member of the World Health Organization, World Mental Health Surveys Consortium, which is the leading collaborative project in psychiatric epidemiology globally. So I'm really looking forward to an engaging conversation. I've been to many of these things, and people who sit where I sit kind of like to intimidate the rest of you with a lot of statistics about how much they know about these topics and how much they've read. I'm not going to do any of that because this is experiential. So I'm going to invite Farid. I'm going to ask Farid, Farid is used to interviewing people and telling stories. So Farid, you're on the other side of the table today. What is your story?
Well, I mean, I have many stories, but I think in this context, in relation to this, in this context, my story is one of not understood mental health issues from a very early age. I can go back and talk a little bit about my upbringing, which was, you know, and this is not a sob story because, you know, this is something I've dealt with or I'm dealing with, but I grew up in a very violent household. I grew up in a very abusive household. I grew up with a very alcoholic father. And subsequently, as a small child, not being able to have control of the situation, ended up in a similar pattern. You talked about a paradigm shift when we started. I was following the exact circle that my father had set out for us, and only realized that I needed help when I was 43, which was about 4.5 years ago. I have been not physically abusive to many of my partners in life, but emotionally abusive. My father was very physically abusive to my mother and emotionally abusive. But when I woke up one morning with a very, very rotten hangover and took a look in the mirror at 43 years old, I turned to my wife and said, yeah, I need help. I need a lot of help. I had tried to quit using drugs and alcohol for 3 years prior to that, and simply could not. I was doing outpatient counseling, not inpatient counseling here in Nairobi. But I mean, I would go from the counselor's office straight to the bar, et cetera, et cetera. So I went to rehab in South Africa. You know, I've skipped about 40 years, forgive me, but I went to a rehab in South Africa, and that's when the reasons and the reasons for my abuse of alcohol and drugs were uncovered. You start to uncover the layers that are covered up by numbing of alcohol and drugs, and you start to realize that deep down inside there's a very frightened small child that was never really dealt with that fear growing up, and then used sports initially, and then obviously graduated to alcohol and drugs, and that became a vice to numb a lot of what was buried deep inside of me. I have now been clean and sober. I will say for the most part, I've had a couple of slips along the way, but clean and sober for 4 years. And in those 4 years, I have managed to deal with a lot of the things that bothered me. And obviously mental health issues being a large part of it. I was dealing with anxiety. I was dealing with paranoia. I was dealing with depression. And I, you know, am in treatment for those things. When I say treatment, I see a therapist or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, if you will. But I think for me, what I realized while I was in rehab was that the drugs and alcohol were only a symptom of a bigger problem. And when you start addressing those problems, it's very easy to stay on the path of recovery. So that is my condensed story. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So
Sure.
That's exactly why I wanted to give statistics, because I wanted you to hear from somebody who's lived the experience and somebody who can, in a real life situation, relate their story. And now I want to ask Lukoye, can you fit Farid to your data? He understands that.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Farid, for your story. And without being cliche, Farid's story is indeed a common story. And it's a common story because, firstly, parenting techniques and parenting styles are transmitted from one generation to another, and not genetically, but socially. Because many of us, when you come of age and get into relationships, the model of a relationship that you have the closest observation of is what your parents or those that brought you up did. So your model of how a father should behave and how a father should look like is how your father behaved, or the father figure in your family, how they behaved and how they look like. So that's an important aspect. Now, the unfortunate thing, again, emanating from Farid's story, is that we have what we call advanced childhood experiences. And research today shows that the more advanced childhood experiences you have, the more likely you are to develop numerous mental and physical, chronic physical illnesses, including hypertension, heart disease, pain conditions, but also depression, post-traumatic stress, and so on. And many people in this room will identify with some of the things Farid has said, even if the parents were not physically extremely abusive, there are certain things that happened in your homestead that we consider to be advanced childhood experiences. Things around neglect, things around emotional abuse, things around curtailing of certain things that you'd like to do that are good for you, but that would just not be done for you, and so on. So many of those things constitute what the advanced childhood experiences. And so your upbringing and how your family is when you're growing up is a huge and important factor in get a mental illness and other chronic physical illnesses as well. And if you do get it, whether you're likely to recover and still continue living a productive life. So indeed, the data fits. The story is a very good illustration of what the data says out there. Now, if you link this to fatherhood, without intervention or without introspection, as was the case with Farid, then you're likely to continue with the cycle, and any children coming out of this relationship will also see this is a model of how a father behaves. This is what a father does, and it becomes something that continues. But now, unfortunately, every generation in which it is repeated, problems come in earlier and earlier. Just like when we have genetics and there is consanguinity when people are inbreeding, every subsequent generation, problems come earlier and earlier. And the same way when we are transmitting these, what we call memes or social equivalents of genes, problems come earlier and earlier. So you start having younger and younger people developing serious mental illnesses, younger and younger people developing serious chronic physical conditions. We are seeing a lot more hypertension, a lot more heart disease, a lot more cancer in younger and younger people because these things are being amplified with every generation.
Yeah. So just to kind of move this forward a little bit, there's research out there that shows that adherence to masculine norms such as self-reliance and emotional control, perhaps reliable predictors of low health literacy. I'm not saying that Farid was not literate about his health, but the time that it took him for 3 years. And there's also data that men are less likely to seek help more than women and turn to dangerous and unhealthy behavior. Could be some of the things you've talked about, Farid, in your life, alcohol, substance abuse, and all of that. Where is the data on this?
Yeah. So a lot of qualitative research, if you look around, shows, firstly, of course, we know that stigma, especially around mental health and psychological health, is huge in the general population. But the social constructs of masculinity, of what a man should be, in our setting at least, but I would venture to say almost everywhere where we share certain cultural attributes, is that men are supposed to be strong. And the strength of men is not only meant to be physical, it's also supposed to be emotional and psychological. And so showing weakness is something that men are not supposed to do. And because we have stigmatized psychological health, if somebody complains of things that have to do with their mental health or well-being, it's considered a form of weakness. And so a man saying that they're feeling a little depressed is a no-no, you can't do that. And now a father demonstrating that kind of weakness is even worse, because people will be looking at you and saying, you're responsible for bringing up other people. You can't be weak emotionally. You can't be weak physically. You can't be weak psychologically. So there's plenty of literature from our culture, but also from what we call Western cultures, that these masculine norms are persistent. In many of our settings where we have now, and I would then say the religious.
I'm going to come to them.
You will come to them. So a lot of these have been mixed with religious undertones, where we have certain male father roles that are built into people's religious beliefs and fused with cultural expectations to say, this is how a man should look like. This is how a man of God should look like. This is how a man who is right with the world should look like. And all of them end up eating the man from inside. Because as a man, you're going through life like everybody else. You face the same challenges, you face the same setbacks. You have moments of doubt, you have moments of depression, if you like. If you can't express them, then you can't get help. And if you can't get help, it keeps amplifying and growing. And that's how we end up looking for drugs, looking for risky sexual behavior, looking for things, thrill seeking, that ends up being harmful to ourselves and to the people that we care for.
So next time I won't sit next to Lukoye because it seems like he's reading my notes. So let me set it up this way so that I can bring Pastor Simon and Imaam Charo. And he stole the words from my mouth. There are social cultural aspects of men's acculturation that are deeply rooted in conformity to masculinity norms, just as Lukoye has said. And these are the origins in the Abrahamic faiths, Islam and Judeo-Christian teachings, and especially beliefs and values. Are we saying that men are preordained to just live this kind of difficult personal situations in obscurity and without ever getting help? That somehow the way that our faith structures are based provides a very strong social and even spiritual disincentive to speak about things, because the man is the Godhead of the family and all of these other notions around that makes it very difficult for us to speak, because we hate to be judged and we have to project a certain demeanor, because there's everybody else who's, and it's worse when you're a father, isn't it? Because you can't go home and scream. Your kids are going to be horrified and your wife is going to be calling the neighbors. So how do we navigate this in the faith setting? And I'll start with you, Pastor Simon.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here and to have this conversation. I think I'm in agreement with the conversation.
Yeah, is it on?
So yeah, we have to set it up.
All right. Yeah, I was saying I'm in agreement with the social, religious, cultural constructs, which are not healthy for masculinity in the way that we practice. And I like what you said, that a lot of the men feel, I can't really talk about what I'm going through because I'm going to be judged negatively. So what we decided to do is to start where men are. Like begin by saying, let's call the program Man Enough. Then it invites the men to come feeling like, yes, that's what I believe in. And then I'll spend time using the same scriptures to deconstruct what they've always believed about being strong. Let's talk about strength means that you're vulnerable enough. That's strength, that you're vulnerable to face yourself, to face other people. So I think bringing men together to a place of group therapy, which is what we do with the men we meet in the churches and in the community, we get to talk about three things now to address what he talked about. Number one, to redefine what masculinity is and deconstruct the myths like big boys don't cry, and even use the scripture to challenge culture and say Jesus wept in public. So why should men not weep? And begin to say that's a way of just refusing to face yourself. You don't have to weep before your children, but you can find a few of the men, and that's how we bring them together and say this is a safe place. So we provide a safe place so that these men could talk about their issues. I remember one case when a father and a son came together in the program, and they didn't even know the other person was there, but they met in the program. And the father, after a few sessions, was strong enough, and he was in his 70s, to actually stand before 40 men and apologize to his son. And there was reconciliation, and the son to come back. So providing that safe place as we redefine what masculinity really means and deconstruct the myths, we provide a safe place, which is a place of group therapy, where men can actually confess their weaknesses. I've seen countless numbers of men cry before other men and say, I need help. But because at that point they're given permission by other men to be real and to talk about whatever it is that society has not given them permission to talk about. And lastly, then to challenge them and invite them to express their masculinity in a way that is a blessing and uplifting to those that they serve. That's their wives, their children, so that the headship thing is not about, I have to be in charge. It's about, I'm a servant to the others. So redefine what it is that they have misunderstood. So I would say the same culture and religion and social constructs that have been pushed to bring men to a place of lack of mental health and emotional health. Yeah. The same can be interpreted differently to help the same men realize what strength is, what leadership is, and how they need to deal with their own issues. I'm glad to say I've seen it happen enough times to say there's hope.
Thanks, Professor Simon. I think you've really set it up for us to get Imam Charo's perspectives of the positive effects that religion can have on mental health by creating mechanisms through which social support and integration can happen. Now, are our houses of faith successful in doing this? Do we have the right resources to do this? Or are we trying to adapt and try to learn and create those opportunities? We had a brief discussion yesterday about whether, how much preparation do they have? Would these kinds of resources that Professor Lukoye is talking about be useful? Do we now need to see some kind of some collaboration between faith houses and the kind of data that Lukoye is presenting and abstracting that from Farid's story to say that Farid's story is not unique, and we're getting more and more of these coming out in our societies?
First of all, thank you for invitation, and I think I'm happy to be here and sharing at least this topic, which is important. And we know in our society, men don't, the way as said, we don't cry, and especially, you'll be seen as a very weak person, and so to answer your question, I think places of worship, especially from now where I come from as a Muslim, I was having a side talk here with Farid that we are at advocacy level. It's not that we are doing enough or but in terms of resources, I think we do have the institutions, we do have, at least it's something, if we embrace that, we can be able at least to address, and we can do what is supposed to be done. But also looking also at the places of worship, it's also it's also another challenge, because looking at also the hierarchy, we're talking of men, and also the religious leaders also tend to be, you're having issues that you are dealing with their community, with their congregants, and also you have your personal, and at the same time, because now you are everything there, you are overall. We don't even, for you to get that opportunity also to share with a fellow, Imam, with a fellow pastor, and that, I'm having these personal challenges, and also, as I'm serving my people, these are some of the challenges, you'll also be, you'll see that, or people will think that you're weak. So because you are the one who, guide us, and today you are complaining of this. And I think it's very important verse that he's mentioned. In most cases, I do refer to this as the longest verse in the Bible, that Jesus wept. And, he's a role model. How many people do, even we Muslims, we, the way we look at Jesus, but, despite that, he wept when things were, out of hand, and he wept. And you'll also find that also in Islam, we we are encouraged also to cry, and you'll find the rewards of those who cry, shedding tears. It shows a sort of humility when you're asking God and when you're praying. So it's not, it does not really show that you're weak, but it shows that you need help. Even if it's not a fellow, human who is going to help you, but at least, at least you have a being that will be, seeking help. So talking of the religious institution as, having a capacity to handle this, we do have, but only that if we are able to, to embrace and, accept all this. Thank you.
So Farid, you talked about the first person you spoke with and made the declaration that you needed help was your wife. How was that? Because what we've been talking about is this masculine posturing. I know men can tell their wives a lot of things without feeling like they're less men, but how did you think about everything else that would happen after you admitted that you needed help, and how that was going to be perceived about you as a person? Because when men drink, men just drink. Yeah, they just drink. They don't drink because they have a problem. They just like to drink.
Very true.
And when they do other things, they just do those things because they do those things. But people don't realize, as Lukoye said, that substance abuse could have its genesis in deep mental turmoil.
Yeah.
And those are just big projections. So I just want to figure out, I just want us to hear your story about overcoming this steep hump of masculinity to basically, as Pastor said, you were man enough to face yourself.
Mm-hmm. I can say, hand on heart, I didn't cry when my father passed away, but I did cry when I told my wife that I needed help. I had tried everything on my own. I think it was either that or I was going to die. I think I'd realized at that point, as the doctor said, I'd done so much damage to myself. I couldn't even really look in the mirror anymore because I didn't really recognize that person on the other side of the, on the other side. I did cry, and I'm in no way a crier. I was raised not to cry, like probably many of the men in their 40s here, or 30s or 40s here, I'm sure. But I did. And interestingly enough, what came out of that was an incredible amount of support from my family. Not just my wife, but my mom, my aunts, family overseas, an incredible amount of support. That I did think about what was going to happen when I admitted that I had a drug and alcohol problem, it's not something I hide. I had a cocaine problem. I had an alcohol problem. I could drink a bottle of whiskey on a given day, no issue at all. But I did think that the adverse was going to be the result of me admitting it, which was going to be my family shunning me, like many probably feel if they were to talk about their emotions or their feelings or their problems or their addictions. But I had an incredible amount of family support, of which I don't think I would have been able to follow through with my recovery without. That taught me some valuable lessons as well, that I was raised completely wrong by my dad, completely. That he probably had similar issues growing up that he was portraying in our family setup when my sister and I were young, we were children. And that, as you said earlier, the cycle continues. He was continuing a cycle that he simply could not break, and didn't know how. I often think, as my dad was an alcoholic and, quite a serious alcoholic, I don't think there would ever have been a time in his 40s where someone could have approached him and said, you need help. You know what I mean? Certainly not him turning to someone and saying, you need help. It is a generational thing as well, I think. My son, my oldest, my second born wasn't born then, but my firstborn was around 4. My relationship and the way I I parent as a father now has completely changed 180 degrees. And as you said, the paradigm shift, I was also told in rehab, there are two types of fathers in this world. Fathers that continue the cycle and there's fathers that break it. There's just those two. So I had an opportunity to probably not do too much damage in my son's 4 years before I broke the cycle of what an alcoholic, drug addicted father looks like.
Okay, there's nothing else you can add to something. I'm not going to ask Lukoye whether he can fit his data. But I think one of the things that I want to raise with the two faith leaders is, we've all reached the levels of North America and Europe in terms of depopulation of the churches and faith places. But we begin to see some trends. I'm just wondering whether the fact that men are less religious than women and attend church less and much less kind of card-holding members of a Bible and prayer group, might this limit the ability of faith-based and faith-led interventions to support men in this journey?
Well, maybe I could say something about that. I think part of that was men felt, that men I've talked to said, I can't go to church like my wife to go and cry before God. I don't need that help. There are people who talk like that. But I think what I've seen about the programs we're doing, calling men together to come and talk through their issues. I've seen a lot of men who are not in faith begin to come to those meetings. They don't want to come to the church first. But when they hear men are meeting together to talk about their issues, they're beginning to feel like this is a fireplace traditionally, where men got together and talked about what they were going through. And then eventually they get to come to church. But we're seeing more men come to the men's meeting first before they come to church. So I think it's possible because generally, I think in our continent and in many other places of the world, the church or the religious bodies are still trusted that they would be able to speak to the community. But maybe something to add on what you had said earlier and what Farid said. I'm seeing more women begin to give their men permission to be vulnerable. When we finished that program, we actually asked the men to invite their children and their wives to come and celebrate them for the 10 weeks that they've gone through. And it's amazing how the women are the ones, celebrating this man and say, we're so glad he has faced these issues and we're here to support him. And that's something probably some years ago, the women would say, no, I don't want to see my man vulnerable. That scares me. I don't know how to handle that. But now I think we are getting to a point where they're willing to support and say, please go. In fact, sometimes when they announce a next program, 30% of those who sign in are signing. It's their wives who sign them in. Because they really want to see these men come and deal with their issues. So I think we are at a better place than where things were. And I hope and challenge, I think, the religious leaders to use our reach in the community to provide a safe place for the people, the men, even those who are not religious, to be able to come there and feel safe.
Imaam Charo.
Okay, thank you. I think talking of or about the Muslim community, it's a bit different because you'll find, especially most places of worship, those are mosques, they are filled up by men. And this is also an indication that men are more religious in Islam than women. But it's not. It does not really mean that women are not, because we also know the other part they play, because they are encouraged more to worship at home and stuff. And now when you talk of hijab and other stuff, this where you come to understand that also they are also religious as well, but also based on the roles and the responsibilities that put on men, especially in Islam. I think this is the last person that you'll see, showing sort of weakness, because, men, with authority in that house, with that strength, you are the protector of that household, and also you are the provider, and all these things. So, so going through a bit of challenge, and also maybe to an extent, showing that bit of, shedding tear. It's, I think, for most men would be the last thing that you see, especially Muslim men. And that's why also it brings us into, trying to advocate this to imams and sheikhs, that at least we need to at least embrace the, the mental health, because because also looking at our community, you say, the much that they are, what they are facing or what they are going through, they wouldn't share with anyone. And at times, we got to a point when I was the chair of imams in Nairobi, they got to a point and it was like, someone comes and, complains of something to imam, and on Friday now, like today, that will be the topic of discussion. There's a member of this congregation that on this day, it makes these people, feel, I'm being exposed. So, and so when we encourage that, at least if we encourage imams to embrace, mental health and all these issues, so that, because men, in most cases, you find them, they are into, drug abuse, and I think it's common, and it's something that you will see in the Muslim community, consumption of cards and, the miras, and also we have issues now as we are talking, we have, alcohol consumption, and, it has resulted into a lot of things, domestic abuse and a lot more things that were not, common within Muslim community, but now are being, seen everywhere. And but it's also a result of what men are going through. They are unable to share. They don't want to share, and they just look, maybe the way to cope with this, or the way to do this thing maybe is they just look for a way out, and that's where they end up. So I think working with imams and sheikhs, making them understand the importance of mental health, and also integrating the scripture, because for Muslims it's also very important, because if you come up with something and you don't show where it relates with the scripture, that will be another discussion. So I think if we are able to integrate it and incorporate some of the scriptures in this, it will be something that that will work wonders in the community.
Thanks. So Lukoye, a two-part question. Mm-hmm. The first part is there a male form of depression? And if yes, what are the symptoms and how might it differ from women's? And then the other one is there such a thing as stage of life or age risk factors associated with mental health among men?
Yeah. So firstly, I think in order to dispel any misconceptions, there is depression. It's major depressive disorder. It manifests in men, it manifests in women. So there's no male type depression, there's no male female type depression. It's the same, the criteria is the same. The content of the symptoms might be different because it is dependent on your circumstances and your situation, but then the definition of those symptom types is the same whether you're a man or a woman. We know that women are more likely to be diagnosed with depression than men, almost anywhere in the world. As epidemiologists, we ask ourselves why, and many people have come up with many explanations, but I stick with the statement that women are more likely to be diagnosed with depression than men, because that means something different from women are more likely to have depression than men. Because with the same set of symptoms, if people go to seek help, often in primary care or in common settings, the woman is more likely to be diagnosed with depression in that setting than the man, because of the social constructs and the perception that depression is a weakness. Therefore, your average clinician seeing a patient who is having problems with sleep, has appetite changes, is lethargic, is feeling hopeless, feeling worthless, and so on. If it is a woman, your average clinician will say, you have depression, you need help. Your average clinician seeing a man with the same symptoms might say, maybe let's do a CT scan. Maybe let's do a blood test. This cannot be explained. And so this is why, as an epidemiologist, I look at it as likelihood of getting a diagnosis rather than an actual difference in prevalence. And I think it is something that is still worth studying, and it is something that we're looking into. So at the end of the day, second thing again related to this is we look at suicide statistics. And if you look at it from the outcome side, men are 4 times as likely to die from suicide compared to women, okay? 4 times if you look at the statistics. However, if you go to the space before the suicide, women are more than 4 times likely to attempt suicide than men, all right? And again, you think about why this is so, and as an epidemiologist, I would say again that women will express their suicidal intent more easily than men, because you can't talk about attempting suicide as a man. And when you get to the point of trying, then the method you choose to use is often more likely to be lethal compared to women. So if you sit in the same space and people are discussing suicide, a woman might tell you, because it's allowed or society has given permission for women to say these things, that, you know, I feel so bad I could even die. Yeah, I'm treated so badly in that house. I mean, it's better if I were dead. It's easier for a woman to say this than for a man to say that. And that results in the kinds of statistics that we see that suggest women are more likely to attempt suicide than men, but men are more likely to die from suicide than women. And so this, I think, highlights the space or the place of social norms, what we call cultural norms, what we consider tradition, what we consider to be beliefs in the manifestation of symptoms of distress. The second part of the question that had to do with age, indeed, there are certain conditions whose risk increases as you grow older. And again, if you look at suicide, even within genders, the older people are more likely to, if you look at suicide, the older people are more likely to die of suicide than younger people, even though younger people are more likely to try to kill themselves than older people. Again, reasons might be similar to the difference between men and women. If you look at depression, it is often associated with multiple other conditions that people accumulate as they age. And those also including cardiovascular problems, which are linked to depression, chronic pain conditions can be linked to depression, cancers, which increase with age, can also be linked with depression and so on. So those conditions, their prevalence will increase with age as we grow older. But again, it's an epidemiological finding based on the permission society gives people to express psychological distress. If I am 70 years old, often, and apologies to the 70-year-olds in the room, society gives you permission to say certain things that would be considered inappropriate if a younger person said them. If my grandfather sat there and said, listen, oh, you guys, whatever you're saying is very boring, I'll go and sleep. You guys will say, yeah, he's an old man, that's allowed. If a younger person did that, they say, but why would you say that? You know, you can think it, but why would you say it? And so society gives us permission to manifest certain symptoms of distress at different stages in our lives, again, depending on our gender. And that has a significant impact on our mental health.
Do you have questions from the audience? Or not yet? As we get that sorted, I just want to ask Fareed a question before we go into the Q&A. Apart from just staring at the precipice of your life, what about you, your upbringing, as you described it, made it possible for you to come out and seek help? Because as Lukoye has just expressed, men are not very communicative.
Yes.
Not very expressive and all of that. But it seems like you broke the mold there somewhat in your journey. And I'm just trying to figure out whether there's anything generalizable about that you might share with this body of colleagues.
No, I don't think it was. I think I went through the majority of my life covering up feelings and emotions and the real way I felt about myself and my life. I think I couldn't think of another way, at that point. I think I'd gotten to a point. And look, I've got a number of friends, age mates, in and out of my community who have continued the path of self-destruction because they can't face the reality of the situation. I'm pretty fortunate that I had a moment of madness, maybe, to say I need help, because that's what it was. As I said, I had tried the Alcoholics and Narcotics Anonymous meetings. I had gone to drug counseling one-on-one sessions for a good, period leading up to the admission that I was, in AA, we say we're helpless. I was helpless and hopeless. But I don't think there was any moment except for the fact that I thought to myself, if I continue like this, I won't see my son. At that point, the one child, I will never see him growing older or growing up. And I think for me, that was frightening. I mean, I was literally, when they say you seek help when you've hit rock bottom, that's where I was. I was at rock bottom.
And I think, Alex, it might be it would be remiss if we went to the end of this conversation without realizing that fatherhood is not a gender construct. That fatherhood includes women. And the reason I say this, and I think there has been allusions to this both by Simon and Fareed, is that women play an important role in shaping fatherhood, and shaping perceptions of fatherhood, and deciding who is a real father, who's not a real father, who's a good father, who's a bad father. Women play a huge role. And then in the privacy of your bedroom, women can play a huge role in helping you discover those problems that you might not be willing to face. And I think the fact that you spoke to your wife first is evidence of this. That within the home state, the women that make us fathers play a big role, sometimes like the mirror that stands in front of you, and you can look through this mirror, see yourself and say, this is not the man that I expected to be at this age. And that is, I think, something that we must never lose sight of.
Yeah, can I just add on? Sorry, there's something I'd like to add on to as well. I saw a lot of, I didn't have I didn't have any relationship with my father, and to the point where, everything he sort of did when I got to a certain age, was pretty repulsive to me. I also started seeing a lot of those characteristics appearing in myself. And that was a very frightening prospect. So at that point, I thought to myself, I can't end up like the man that I, that caused so much pain in my household. And I think for me, that was a big part of that agreement with myself.
Yeah.
So actually, this is an interesting point to bring in. This question that relates to exactly this discussion. How to maintain mental health in a space of high social expectations. And the person asking the question talks about a very, very designable pattern of erosion of clear boundaries in genders. I think they talk about the socioeconomic environment, where all of the constructs around maleness and masculinity is about fending for your family. Now, I know a ton of women who can fend for their families too. So I think this is where men now start to find themselves, and there are very, very few spaces to express for lack of a better word, genuine masculinity in the way that we've been socialized, that men provide, etc. So, and Lukoye, you've kind of alluded to that, but it brings in the other conversation of how we socialize women too, and especially in this era, that those very, very traditional definitions of male differentiated gender roles are perhaps antiquated. And I'd like to hear what the Imams would say after that, but Lukoye, you go first.
Yeah, I think one important thing and a theme that keeps coming up over and over is about the definition of masculinity. What does it mean to be a man? And then tying that definition to a concept called strength, and being the antithesis of weakness, and defining strength in very specific terms. You know, physical strength is a key prerequisite to being masculine. Emotional strength, you don't cry, you don't express emotions, you don't say certain things. Social strength, where there's leadership required, then a man must rise to the top and be at the top of the heap. So those are definitions we have placed as part of masculinity. I think the solution begins with a redefinition of masculinity, of what does it mean to be a man, and beginning with a redefinition of strength, so that strength is not brute force, but strength includes the ability to reflect, the ability to introspect, and the ability to identify problems in your own life and to deal with them, and holding that up as strength. And not just being a uniquely masculine strength, but a strength of a human being, the ability to sit back, look at your life and say, I might have done better here, and I have a problem and I need a solution. So redefining strength from brute force, because I mean, we can easily find examples today of women who are physically stronger than men, right? So we can begin there. We can begin there. And we can find women who are intellectually stronger than men, who are socially stronger than men, and so on and so forth. So this is the evidence we need to place in front of ourselves and say, perhaps we need a redefinition of what strength means and what masculine strengths might be and what feminine strengths are. And beginning from there, then we remove this heavy burden of responsibility on the shoulders of half of our population, that they have to carry the entire universe on their shoulders, even when they can't. And this causes a lot of psychological distress.
Pastor Simon.
Well said. I'm in complete agreement. I think what we need to do, and it's really all of us, the men themselves, because a lot of men do some of these things to impress their own fellow men. So we need to give each other permission to be at weak points. But also the women. I think there's a saying in our culture, modern culture actually, that ladies say, my money is my money, and your money as a man is ours. And of course, that brings a lot of pressure to the man. I was talking to a man during COVID who lost his job, and he couldn't tell his wife because he was expected to pay bills and do other things. So he began to borrow money, and he was actually slipping into depression because he couldn't say, because the wife says, my money is my money. And in fact, at some point, he had to borrow from the wife some money to pay school fees. And now the wife was saying, he borrowed me money, he hasn't paid, and it's their child. So I think ladies as well need to support in this redefinition. The fact that in olden days we said the man was a sole provider, it's because of the way the economy was constructed. But right now we are co-providers. We're co-providers. I also wanted to say in terms of mental health, I think as religious leaders need to play a big role. For example, I've been to funerals where someone died of suicide and the minister officiating doesn't say it. He just says this was God's will. And that's a very easy way to get out of
Absolutely.
it. But I have been in places when, you know, my own nephew died of suicide, committed suicide, and we had to talk about it. We said, we've got to talk about this and we're going to talk about it from the front so that people know these are realities. Some religious leaders see this as purely spiritual, demonic. Thankfully, in most of the theological schools now, they do counseling psychology, and they're taught, the background of some of these things, so that they can help people and not just lump it as, because that becomes spiritual abuse when you're not helping a person in the right way. So I think we all need to work together to change this. But at the end of the day, men giving each other, because I believe a man is made a man among other men. It would be me more than even my wife who would push you to do something because you want to feel like a man besides me. And if we can give each other that permission, even though the women and children and culture plays a big role, then it will be a lot easier for us to deal with these things.
Mr. Charo, your thoughts? Imam Charo, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's important also for us to understand that these are roles that we either came up with, or at times we just, say that this is how God created us, and these are roles that are given to men, and these are for women. And but also one of the most interesting thing in Islam, you find that our Prophet Muhammad was married to Khadija, and Khadija is known to be, she was a business lady and she was wealthy. And in most of the, at the beginning, when Prophet Muhammad started, propagating Islam, he used to be, Khadija used to finance most of that. And it's very much okay for, for men to say that maybe talking financial, that I'm unable maybe to cater for this. And as a woman or a wife can come in and chip in. And because the way we take it from the social, the context that we take it from is that, as a man, I'm in charge and I should provide. And, this is where now, we start getting the burden that, and you really want to show that you are in charge, and yet you are incapable of. And, so these other problems, that's where they come in. And, now the mental health and other, some of these other things. So it's important. And I think in some years back, we had, discussion, a type of marriage called BCR, though most of the sheikhs do not, accept it. But BCR is said to be a type of a marriage that, a man says, I'll marry you, but I won't be providing for you, but the lady will be providing. So there's this discussion also ongoing. But more importantly, I think that I think men should say, should be able to come up and say what they are capable of and what they are not capable of, so that they should not, burden themselves. Thank you.
So for in your advocacy work, obviously, this inordinate burden of being a man presents worrying stigma, and it makes it very difficult for men to come out, because it's almost like a cop-out. If you say you can't provide, and those are the sources of pressure, there's a perception. If you're married, in your advocacy work, building on your own experience, how have you gotten into these discussions?
Look, I think it's been said here, when you're with a group, and it doesn't have to be just men, but obviously men in a group, it's really just been from sharing my story. I think because of my profile in the media, the perception would be that I'm probably bulletproof. So I thought initially it would be wise to use the platform, which I have done. And I was sharing this earlier when we were in the meeting room upstairs. I remember when I wanted to do this Engage talk with Safaricom, where I shared my story for the first time after coming back from rehab. We're from this community, this Ismaili community. And my mom, they've been asking me for a few months, and then finally I agreed to do it. And I told my mom I'm going to do it. And my mom said, oh, no, what will people say? and she really was unhappy, but I did it against her will. And then the first message she got from someone saying, "You must be so proud of your son," she took full credit for me. But it was on my own will, even though my mom would beg to differ. But really, just to go back to what you asked, obviously, just using the platform that I have, the interactions I have with people all the time, getting the story out there so people feel comfortable coming to me. And saying, can you talk to this person? I'm no way a therapist, I'm no way a counselor, but I'm more than happy to give advice and share from my own experiences.
Yeah. So we'll be wrapping this up shortly. I think I just want to close on this question of stigma, because I think this is really the elephant in the room. I think all of these things, there is a remedy, there is potential for intervention if people spoke and came out in time. They would get the help, but we know they don't because of all these things we've talked about. So, Lukoye, where is the state of science in this, in terms of basically, creating potential data points to help us understand the social constructs of stigma? We've understood some of those could be embedded deeply in religion and faith. Where are we on this one?
Yeah. So I'll begin by pointing out a very easy experiment on conformity that was carried out a long time ago by a teacher of psychology who went into a classroom like this and had one of the students wait outside, and then told the rest of the class that I am going to ask a question when the class begins. And the question will be a very simple question, which is, who is the first president of the United States? And you're all going to say something like Hillary Rodham Clinton. And this is all I'm asking you to do. And let's see how it goes. And so the student comes in, sits in the crowd, and the teacher stands in front and says, I want to test your knowledge of the world and how things work. Who among you knows who the first president of the United States was? And somebody shot up with the arm on one corner and said yes, and the person said it was Hillary Rodham Clinton. Who doesn't know this? And somebody else in another corner stood up and said, I agree, it was Hillary Rodham Clinton. I mean, what history books are you guys reading? It's very obvious. And 3, 4, 5 people did that. Then he asked this student who was into the class when everybody else was coached. And the student hesitantly at first, but with more confidence said, it is very obvious that the first president of the United States was Hillary Rodham Clinton. And he said it. So this is the power of conformity. It takes, and then they did this experiment and had only one person in the room give the right answer, and everybody else gave the wrong answer. But only one person gave the right answer before the student was allowed to answer. And in that instance where the student had at least one person give the right answer, the student adamantly stood by the right answer. He didn't go with the majority because at least one person spoke out. How does this refer to stigma? Stigma thrives on ignorance. And ignorance is used as lack of knowledge, not in the colloquial insulting term, but it's ignorance that we do not know. So if somebody comes up and speaks like Farid does and says, people say men don't get depression. Then Farid stands and says, listen, I have had depression, I have been treated, and here I am. And that chips away almost immediately from the dozens of people in that crowd who have experienced the same thing, but they were unwilling to speak about it. So the first step to chip away is to have people actually speak out and say, I have gone through this, and here I am. I just look like you, but I have gone through this. So that is ignorance. The other bit that then grows from ignorance is prejudice and the negative attitudes that we attach to certain labels like mental illness. And again, chipping away at that is modeling. President Uhuru stands up on Madaraka Day and says, guys, mental illness has become a big problem in this country. I'm dealing with it in my own family. Everybody's dealing with it. It's a big problem. And that makes it easier for people to speak about it with less stigma. And the final bit of stigma is discrimination. Now, the behaviors that we manifest of shunning and keeping people away because they have these problems, and beginning to deal with it is ourselves, or people in authority, or people with the ability to do this, being more inclusive and having in their circles people who have gone through these challenges, and these people being allowed to speak their story without changing their circumstances, without making them look smaller, but also actively outlawing discriminatory behavior, like saying, you know, we're forming a football team, but if you have had, you know, a mental illness, we can't put you in the team because you'll be weak. So outlawing that actively as an institutional policy helps to reduce the stigma towards it. In Kenya today, I am very happy to say over the past 3 years, almost exactly 3 years, things have shifted significantly. Before 2019, it was life as usual, and we were dealing with stigma and all that. But when the president spoke about it on Madaraka Day in 2019 and said, this is a problem, and we're going to have to deal with it, and all government agencies put your heads together, figure out how to deal with it, the quantum of stigma went down significantly. It became much easier for people to speak about it. It became easier for government departments to plan for mental health of their employees and mental health of the people who come to them. So this is what it takes to start chipping away at stigma. I expect in cultural functions, in religious functions, if you have a pastor or an imam who in the course, ordinary course of their preaching, mentions mental illness as some of the things that, you know, happen in society and people get help for, people trust religious leaders, people trust cultural leaders, and the stigma will reduce if we in those positions speak a little bit more positively about these challenges and indicate that there's care. So there is a way forward. We are a shining example in this country that you can actually do something to chip away at stigma, but it has to continue, it has to be sustained, and we have to then build policies around the progress that we make.
Pastor Simon, from your own work and kind of intellectual writing around this subject of fatherhood, you know, what thoughts would you offer on dealing with stigma?
Well, I think he has said enough that as more religious leaders begin to talk about it, we have had seminars where we had fathers come to a training about mental health, because we know if a father in the home actually understands this, then it's going to be easy for the entire family to deal with it. Because especially in the cultural settings, traditional settings, fathers are the law in a sense. So if they come to their family and talk about these things, and we have had fathers become advocates in different villages who are going to be talking about this. And I think, as he said, religious leaders need to speak about this a lot more loudly. We have had that in our church where an entire month we talked about mental health and actually invited people who have been through mental illness to come and give their story. And that changed a lot. Lastly, I think I would say I'm happy about corporate leaders in our country. I think the last 2 years I've been invited to more than 30 corporates to talk about stress, mental health, and masculinity. That means they're doing something about it. We're beginning to realize that there's a conversation that we must have. Yeah. And so I think the only challenge I would give to all of us from every quarter, from academia to churches, to corporates, to politicians, that we all talk about this and normalize it so that we can drive back the stigma.
Okay. I just remembered that there's actually a live audience here.
Yeah.
So, I'm still trying to recover from Zoom stuff. So I'll give an opportunity for some 1 or 2 questions from here before they kick me out of this role. Yes, at least it's not a man.
Is it working? Yeah. My name is Shalini. I'm a Capital FM broadcaster and a motivational speaker around mindfulness and happiness. And my question is to Professor Atwoli, because I've read an article that you've written, quite a few actually, a couple of years ago about attempted suicide being considered illegal, a criminal act in this country. what has that changed? What are your thoughts around that? But also, as we go into the next government, what would you like to see happen from a national and government perspective?
Very good question. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so you'll note that.
Yeah.
There's a gentleman at the back there who. Yes.
My name is Matthew Mtiso from the Coalition Action for Preventive Mental Health in Shalina. Mine is an observation, and I'll lay my burden on science, maybe the academia. I'm one of the beneficiaries of Man Enough, and I remember going back to Pastor Mbevi and asking him to support us in a program we're doing in prison for the correctional officers. And we did with about 30 in 3 different stations. In fact, he is the one who came and officiated it. And what we were addressing there with the men were ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Though they were coming out from a religious context, fatherhoods, what Farid has talked about. But when we come to the academia and the medical fraternity, there's still a lot of cynicism when it comes to conversations about mental health. We still talk about mental health as a disorder. We still, in a negative context, we still talk about mental health in a way that perpetuates actually stigma. The narrative has not shifted so much from an academic and a medical perspective when it comes to mental health. I think going forward, as this is a very good panel that brings the academia, the media, and the society. There's a need for medicine and academia to catch up on what is happening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anybody from this side? I have a peripheral view as well.
Hi, my name is Alvin. I work at Nicole Energy, and my question stems from what Farid shared. So Farid, you talked about your experiences, and you talked about, for the most part, coming to realize that you had a problem and that this stemmed from predominantly your childhood and experiences with your father, right? So to Professor Atwoli, would you say that something is being done to also, for lack of a better word, redeem the generation of Farid's dad and their peers, let's say? Or are we just looking at that generation and going, oops, let's not pretend that happened? Because from his generation going onward, we have been equipped with the information and kind of the skills to handle mental health. But what's being done for his father and their generation? Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Wow. I opened a Pandora's.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
But keep them short so we can get more colleagues ask questions.
Okay, no problem. My name is Shoba Adeche. My question is in regards to how mental health is being now watered down in Generation Z and things of the sort. What mechanisms are there in place for that also not to become a facade or actually just become a trend that you say, oh, I'm actually depressed or something of the sort?
Okay, good question. So I'll finish on this side. So you're next, and then we'll go. We'll wrap it up there.
Thank you so much for the contribution from the panel. I've learned a lot. My question is, mostly the men's issues surround stability and, the establishment of a man. If a man is in his 20s or is a youth like me, the moment you share your issues, you are open to ridicule, especially on unemployment and joblessness. So I think we need also to move from just talks, but also acting. If something needs to be done among those people, maybe who have those issues, if their mental health issues emanates from maybe unemployment, they get a counsel and still something to keep them busy and to reestablish themselves and have that high self-esteem among the society.
Thank you very much. Can we get the mic back there? Wow, there's two, okay. Say that again? Yeah.
So that you see them.
Please stand when you ask your question.
Okay. Hi, my name is Dennis. My question is for Farid. What conversations were you having before? Conversations with yourself, were you having before? And what kind of conversations are you having now? Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. My name is Justin. I have two quick questions. One goes to Farid. How best can you use the media to amplify advocacy for the discussion we've had today? Because if you check on Twitter tomorrow, you'll find someone called Amerix, maybe some Andrew Kibes, saying quite the opposite of what we've been discussing today. Yeah, they'll be telling men tomorrow how they need to not to be weak and all those sorts of things. And then it's quite the opposite of what we've been able to achieve today. But then he has bigger reach and more influence, especially in social media that we have. And not many men can have access to a panel like this, for example. So how best can we really utilize the platforms that we have to amplify the message that we have to kind of counteract the effect of toxic masculinity that is out there? That's the first one. The second question goes to Prof about the context of the family. I think the president talked about the rise of the single parent families in the country, and that could have effects in the society. I don't know, maybe what are your thoughts in terms of how that could affect men's health going forward? Thanks.
I suspected that was going to come up.
Yeah.
Okay, so keep them brief, but we'll get the panel to respond. Yes, sir.
Thank you, and it's a good discussion. I think my question is just, how do we burst the bubble for men so that we stop being grandiose and come to reality? So sometimes men suffer and they discuss about Arsenal, they discuss about politics, and they're just running away from the real issues that they suffer from every day. And how do we burst that bubble to get them to begin to focus on reality?
Hello, everyone. I'm Samuel from Football Mass. Spanish word means modern football, working on the space of mental health and psychosocial support for children. The biggest question is talking about men, is men are coming from boys, and as they grow, they exist where girls are. And the question to the reforms you're having in Kenya in terms of curriculum, are there such spaces to enable positive transition of boys to men as they exist with girls and women? So for longer impact, I feel the conversation needs to start from at a younger age. Thank you.
Okay, that's a hard one. Yes, there's a lady back here. Oh, Mercy, it was you. Okay.
So thank you so much for this session. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm happy to have my dad here today. My question is, what is the role of us as children and even as wives to help the men around us maintain very good mental health? And what are the signs to look out for someone who's struggling?
Good. Thanks for bringing your dad. Yes, sure. Go ahead.
I'm Manasi Kumar from Brain and Mind Institute. I just wanted to make a comment and would love any reflections the panelists might have, that generally there is a global gap in theories around fatherhood and theories around contextualized theories around how boys develop. So I think from the mental health side too, we have lacked in kind of gathering enough information that can be useful to shaping the society. But, Lukoye would welcome your thoughts.
Okay. Cyril, do you want to ask a question? Cyril? Or you want to pass the mic? Okay. Gitonga, you have a question or you want to pass the mic to somebody else?
Thank you very much for the opportunity and the sharing from everybody. My name is Gitonga Bijua. I work here the Aga Khan University. The question is this: society places the family at the pinnacle of society. Socially, the single man and the single woman battle for the bottom. In your view and experience, Imam Charo, Pastor Mbevi, and I guess Professor, have we seen a difference in terms of the mental stress and issues that they go through? Because as you mentioned, Prof, depression does not distinguish between male or female, and I don't think it does either for single or married people. Father's Day, Father's International. Where is a single man? And is there a different sort of effect on them? Thank you.
Okay. So I understand reliably that the food is stuck in traffic. So
we have time.
We have time. We can ask more questions. Because you've got to earn that food.
Yeah, can we address
How about
those?
that? Yeah. Okay, so let's take this round and then we'll come back.
Yeah.
So who's going to start?
We can start with
Farid.
Yeah, okay. So I think the two questions directed at me, one was what conversations was I having with myself before, and what conversations am I having with myself now? Much kinder ones, that's for sure. I definitely speak to myself with a bit more respect and dignity than I did before. But on a serious note, I'm also very aware of when I'm slipping into the character defects that drove me into addiction and substance abuse. So, you know, that is something that I'm very cognizant of all the time. I always say the easiest part of recovery is staying sober. The hardest part is changing my character defects, which is really the bigger part of the addiction than actually the alcohol and the drugs. So yeah, I think it's recognizing, but really, you know, being much kinder to myself, and you know, allowing myself to feel emotional and to feel, you know, pain if it's there. I'm talking about emotional pain. If I bang my knee on a table, I do scream quite loudly, but something like that. But allowing myself to feel emotional pain, and sitting with emotions is something quite new as well, because, you know, when you are in active addiction, that's exactly what you're covering up, is having to sit with emotions and to sit with feelings. So now that I don't have the vice, I do have to sit with those feelings and emotions. But clarity of mind is a huge benefit to being a recovering addict, for sure. Something that I never thought would feel that good for me. And that's not to say everyone that drinks or, you know, uses any kind of mind-altering substance is an addict, but I am. So I recognize that, and being able to sit with emotions and feelings is huge. I think the second question asked was, how can we use social media? How can I use social media more? People in my position can use social media more, or get the message out a bit more. Yeah, I think there's a lot more that I can do. And people, you know, I have a lot of friends in the media space or in the influencer space that I speak to that have gone through a similar situation as me, maybe not necessarily with drugs and alcohol, but certainly with mental health. And I always do encourage them to use their platforms as much as they can. And one thing, you know, I don't think there's any more questions for me. So in case I don't get to speak again, I really want to say this as a parting shot. If you're a parent, please normalize conversations about mental health at the dinner table, and normalize conversations about addiction at the dinner table. It's really, really, really important that you do that. Make it okay for your kids to come to you and say, I have a problem, or I feel sad, or I feel alone, or I'm being bullied, or whatever the case may be.
Thank you very much. Okay, as the spirit moves you, gentlemen.
Okay. I think I'm going to respond to the last question, and I think you know, how people. I don't know, maybe you'll excuse me for the terminologies at times, but okay, I don't mean to use it negatively, but those who, let's say, who have depression as a challenge, I think more importantly is how they cope with it, how they try to run away, and you know, the solutions they look for. It's how they do it differently. But you know, when people are suffering from depression, I think is the same thing that men, women, and they use. But also for us, and I will urge especially the religious leaders is there's a verse in the Quran that says, ask those who know if you know not, because refer them to experts, refer them to those who know these matters, because in most cases, you know, when someone comes with depression, yesterday when we are having a briefing of this, at least I mentioned that there was a time that a young man was brought and he was thought maybe to be possessed. For us, you know, exorcism, you know, get at times, you know, a bit physical. And, you know, the first instant it was maybe this young man is into drugs. And the other thing, no, maybe this person is possessed, maybe as demon possessions. So by the time you come and realize maybe he's been, you know, manhandled and stuff. So the last resort, someone just suggested, I think this guy is not reacting to the Quran recitation, to the exorcism that you are performing, but can you take him to Madhara? And the guy is okay now. So I think these are some of the things that we need as religious leaders. You know, do not, do not play as if you know you have everything. You have everything. Ask those who know if you do not know. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Lots of good points. I love this conversation. I think we need many more like this. It's part of dealing with the problem that we can actually have conversations at different places. So I commend this. Someone asked about the older men above 70, you know, and I think what I've realized is that if we get older men beginning to talk about this, and I think I mentioned in our programs, we have had people into their 70s, and they come and they listen and they get challenged, and you actually see them open up in a way that they would never have, because it runs against everything they've ever known. But they have seen another facilitator who is their age, who is talking about what he has gone through. So modeling that, just having advocates or leaders and men who, you know, begin to model that to the others. I think it doesn't take very long when someone shares a genuine story like Farid, for another person to say, all right, I will share as well. That is powerful. Someone talks about the boys and what we need to do with the boys. And I think in schools and in colleges like this one, we need programs that provide some safe places for boys as well to deal with this. Yes, it's true, within the marriage setup and family, there might be more potential causes or triggers of stress because of some of the differences there and challenges of economy. But even the young people have their own stress points. My son is going to be stressed because someone said something nasty on social media. My stress is going to be different from where I stand. So there's going to be stress triggers across the board. We just need to know, how do we create safe places for whatever age set to be able to face their own stress points and things that could lead them to a place of mental lack of health. Then lastly, I would say we're all now in the media because of social media. So if just this team of people, if within the next 3 days, as we congratulate fathers, we began to talk about mental health, then we would take the message out there. So I think my call is for all of us to take responsibility for this and realize all of us can make a difference.
Wow. Thank you very much. I think I'll tackle a few questions that came up, but before I do that, it's important for us to frame what is mental health. Because obviously, and I wouldn't blame everyone for thinking that mental health is the same as mental illness or mental ill health. So mental health is a positive state, okay? And if I know if at the beginning of this session I had asked, how many of us here have mental health? Nobody would have raised their hand, right? Because everybody would have assumed this is a negative thing. But mental health is a positive state of well-being that allows you as an individual to interact well with the society around you and with your inner world of being, so that you can pursue and achieve your full potential as a human being. So it's a positive state. Mental illness is when this state is being detracted from. There's something that is interfering with that state. And so then we would have to figure out how to remove whatever it is that is interfering with that state so that you can go on and achieve your full potential. So every time we talk about mental health, we are talking about this positive state. Very good question on suicide decriminalization. For many years now, I have been personally flabbergasted that I read in the penal code, and it says that everybody who attempts to kill themselves should be punished, ideally by being sent to jail. This is what the law says, and it gives a period when you can be jailed for trying to kill yourself. I used to think it's a Kenyan peculiarity, and I was very critical of Kenyans until I saw its origin is from the British, because everywhere they went, they inserted that part into the law. So in India, in Pakistan, in Kenya, in many jurisdictions that had British influence, they criminalized people trying to kill themselves. Now, the British themselves have decriminalized, have removed all those stupid laws from the penal code. But we, whom they colonized, have been a little slower in doing so. So in Kenya, over the past 3 years or so, there have been multiple approaches towards decriminalizing. The first one is in the process of the mental health bill that was being supported by one of the senators, we tried to get in there one section that repeals that penal code section that criminalizes suicide. We didn't succeed, but we succeeded in sensitizing legislators on mental health. And there are a lot more articulate legislators on mental health today than there were 3 years ago because of the interactions that we've had. One of the legislators, after that attempt failed, took it upon herself and drafted a bill specifically to just repeal that section of the penal code. Unfortunately, the parliament has been adjourned, and we will take up that with the next parliament after August. I am confident that within 1 or 2 years, that will work. The third thing is we went with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights and filed a case in court for a declaration that that section of the law is unconstitutional. So if that works faster, then it will be even better than going the legislative route. So that's all going on. There's wide support. The government Ministry of Health is very supportive and they want that. I'm having conversations with the Attorney General's office and they're very supportive. In fact, we were discussing that when it comes to court, is there a possibility of the Attorney General going there and saying, I do not contest this thing. I agree with the petitioners, let it go. And that might make it a bit faster. So those conversations are going on. What's my mental health wish list for the next government? 2 years ago, the president formed a task force on mental health in this country. That task force engaged everyone. It was the widest engagement in government policy making that I have seen myself since I started looking at government. They did town halls, they met politicians, they met religious leaders, they met people from all sectors, and they came up with a report. And that report identified what priorities we should be focusing on from now into the future. If the next government commits to implementing this report, as the current government has committed, we will be in a good place 5 years from now, including the decriminalization of suicide, community mental health services, increasing human resource, increasing investment. That will be done. So that is what I would wish for this country with the next government. I think I have addressed the issue of definition of mental health. So it is probably a popular perception, but it is not necessarily accurate that the medical world doesn't look at other factors around mental health. In fact, the current paradigm of looking at mental health is a tripartite paradigm that has a biological, which is your physical body. It has a psychological component, which is how your mind works. And it has a social component, which encompasses your culture, your traditions, the people around you, your family, your religion, and so on. So it's a lot more holistic than it might have been in the past. For the older generation, thank you very much. I think this has been addressed, but the key thing is, in my own view, people who, when they were young parents, did things that we today look at and say were pretty harmful. Those same people are a lot more helpful today in starting conversations around mental health. If they're empowered with information, if they're given the knowledge, they're a lot more helpful now. People say they've mellowed with age. Your father, if he was around, and my father and any of us, today it's easier to have a conversation with them on mental health than it was 40 years ago when we were coming up. So I think it's just empowering them with knowledge, and they will disperse this information. They dot on their grandchildren, and that's an opportunity for them to have this conversation and say, I made mistakes as a father. I hope you don't make the same mistakes I did. Okay. I agree with the sentiment that was raised about young people not just focusing on talking about mental health, because talking, fine. So people will end up knowing everything about mental health, but then if their circumstances don't change, then the risk of developing mental illness still remains, because there are social determinants, and poverty is a huge social determinant. If you live in poverty, it's a lot more difficult for you to have good mental health than a person who has the resources to take care of the day-to-day needs. So I fully agree that even as we discuss this, we must ensure that programs are in place to take care of the indigent, to take care of young people, take care of the elderly, so that the burden is removed from the average man and the average woman in society. The single parent issue, it's not a straightforward issue, because there are many pathways to being a single parent. And so I do not treat single parenthood as one thing. There are people who are single parent because they're widowed. I mean, it's not a problem to solve. It's, they might need support in certain aspects, they might not need support in other aspects, both men and women. And there are others who are single parents because they disagreed with the spouse and they, live separately. I wouldn't go and tell them you must live together, even if the relationship is toxic. So that's not something that I would encourage. What I think is that every parent, and there's no manual on parenthood, we make it up as we go. But every parent should have at the back of their mind, why am I parenting? I'm parenting for the next generation, for the future. How do I want that future to look like? And with that vision of how the future should look like, then you model the children to fit into that future. That's the best way of doing it. There's no, so we say a child growing up in a family where there's both a father and a mother or two parents has a better outcome than a child with a single parent. But this is only true if every other factor remains constant, because certain families where both parents are there create a dynamic that is hostile and that is more harmful than if this child just lived with one parent. They would be better off. So every parent, we assume, has the best interest of their child at heart, and just empowering them with information about what's the best thing to do at what stage would be useful in my view, rather than prescribing a certain kind of family setting. I think it's been said about transitions from boys to men. And we do have those opportunities in helping young people and young men as they transition from adolescence to early adulthood and so on. We have multiple touch points, including in school, and working with schools to teach young people where to get help when they need it, to teach them to be more self-aware, to teach them how to navigate social challenges is a good starting point for them as they grow into adulthood and get into families. And this works for both girls and boys, people to figure out what are my roles in the society as it is evolving, and how do I deal with the challenges that I meet. So schools are a good place. Religious organizations interact a lot with young people because in our settings, I think, young people are introduced into religion very early, and that can become a setting where they can get some help. Cultural settings, extended family settings. We have initiation ceremonies that are done. And during those initiation ceremonies, people speak with those that they consider to be elders and influential. And that's another avenue for doing that. I think I would almost finish by agreeing with Manasseh that there is indeed a gap in the theories of fatherhood. And it is a gap that is born out of social organization, how society has been organized for a long time, where the scientists of parenting come from. And in those societies have been largely patriarchal. And we have been looking at children being brought up by mothers. And so there's a lot of literature on mothering and the bonding between a child and the mother, and modeling mother to child. Very little about fathering. But it's a product of the structure of the society where the scientists studying these things come from. So perhaps we have an opportunity now to study a little bit more about fatherhood and its impact on child upbringing and on mental health going forward. And as I finish by repeating again on family, because this was the last question about, family as a pinnacle of society. And then here is a single man who's not part of a family that he's raising, and how this impacts their mental health. It is one of the things that we have to deal with as a society, where you don't define a person by the relationships they have. You need to define a person first by who they are, and then think about what kinds of relationships, healthy relationships they can form and still remain whole. When we define men by the ability to provide for other people, we define men by the ability to father children or to make women pregnant. We do that, right? How old are you? I'm 42. How many children do you have? So we need to start defining people first as an individual who is a key cog in society and who's contributing, whether they have children or not, whether they have a wife or not, before thinking about them as social beings with social connections. So I've said a lot, but I hope I have addressed a few of the issues that have come up. It's an ongoing conversation. It is something that I think we are happy to keep hammering on and keep addressing. And people can bring up questions, send them to the organizers, and we can see how to create forums where we can address a lot more of these things. Go home with the answer that there is no manual on parenting. There's no manual on fatherhood. There's only our best intentions when we get into relationships and try to raise children.
Maybe if we have a minute, Prof. There's someone who had asked about the signs of mental
Oh, yes.
illness.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so as family members, as friends of men and of husbands and of fathers, there are certain things that I would say at the outset. You know this person for a period of time. You know how they behave. You know how they do things. If you notice a change in how they do those things, that's how I would put it. If you notice a change, it is useful to be curious, to get close and figure out, are you okay? I'm noticing that you're behaving a little differently lately compared to how I have known you. Is there something going on that I can help with? So for me, you notice a change in how a person behaves from baseline, from the person that you know. It is good to figure out what's going on. Sometimes it might be something as simple as, I have an exam next week and it's making me a little jittery. Once it's done, I'll be fine. But sometimes it might be I'm having relationship problems and I'm really suffering and I need somebody to talk to. So having the availability of somebody being close to say, listen, I am constantly by your side. When you need to speak, I will listen to you. That is important. Illnesses like depression manifest with social withdrawal. Somebody wants to keep more to themselves. Somebody changes their eating habits, their sleep habits. Somebody starts thinking a little strangely, expressing ideas differently from how they used to express themselves. It's useful to get close to them and figure out what's going on. And it's useful to say it's okay to seek help. And I liked what the Imam said, even from a religious perspective, to say, let's seek out the experts and I will walk with you. I will go with you to a person and sit with you, provide you with the support. Often if I have depression and I say, I don't want to interact with other people, it's not necessarily that I don't want to interact with other people. It's that interactions with other people are tiring, they're draining, they make me feel uncomfortable and I don't feel complete in interacting with other people. If I had somebody close who says it's okay to just sit with me there and be quiet and say nothing, just know that I'm a presence in your space. And whenever you feel ready to speak, I will be here. And if there's something you need somebody to do for you, I'm going to be the person to do it. That often is reassuring enough to help somebody to start going in the direction of seeking help. Okay?
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much. I don't want to keep you here any longer. As you can see, this has been a very fascinating conversation. And we also realize that there's a lot of things we don't know.
Yeah.
The structure of society is changing, especially this whole idea that has endured the times called the family. That's changing in many societies. I think if you go to North America, the family looks very different from what it looked like 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And in this country as well, it doesn't look like what it looked like 50 years ago. Social questions, which I think are really important. I think there's serious policy issues here as well. Zul and I, Lukoye and Cyril have talked a lot about the social determinants of mental health. What is that space of government? What is that space of economic capability that only government can lay the infrastructure for. This young man here talked about unemployment as being a critical driver of the state in which a lot of young people find themselves in mentally. I think the other question also is normalizing use of language. Right? I'm depressed, and using it so many times that people just start to really think it's just a manner of speaking.
Yeah, and I worry about that a little bit. That so people think that there's a generation of young people who easily say, "I feel depressed." So, guys, I don't look at that negatively. I think that's a positive thing. A study that was done by David Ndetei and his team around Nairobi and Eastern Kenya in hospitals, where they would go and randomly pick people who are waiting to be treated for malaria, for whatever else, not mental illness. And they did a screen for depression. And they found that more than 40% of the people had clinically significant depression, even though they are coming to hospital for totally different reasons. So if all these people are speaking about it, we'll say, why? Everybody has depression around here. But it's because actually people have a lot of distress that they find it difficult to express because they do not have the language or society doesn't allow them to speak about it. But the young people, that generation Z you're talking about, don't have those inhibitions. They will say it. They say, I didn't sleep very well last night. I think I'm developing depression. I need to see someone. So it's true they need to see someone when they say they need to see someone. We shouldn't dismiss it and say, you guys are speaking about this too easily. Maybe we should be speaking about it too easily as well.
How do you draw a line?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would just tell you, he asked, how do you draw the line between genuine expression of distress and abuse of distress? And it's a good question, but it's a good question for the expert. It's a good question for the psychiatrist, for the psychologist. They know how to draw the line. So get this person to those experts. That person will listen to the story and that person will draw the line and say, no, you're fine. Or that person will say, yes, you have a problem and you need help. So my role as a supporter, as a family member, is to hear the distress and say, come, I will go with you somewhere where you can get help. And that person has been trained to figure out what is illness, what is just distress that can be helped, and what is normal challenges of day-to-day living. So that is how we should look at it, rather than say, you're expressing distress too easily. Thank you, Zul.
All right. Thank you very much. Just wanted to say that what a lively discussion, and thank you very much for the panelists, because I think that we wanted to make sure that the house of worship is well represented, because in Kenya, religion is important. People come to you for help, and we are here to support you. Should you need training, should you need places to go, we are there for you. So, and most importantly, I think that this conversation that we have started, we really would like to amplify people like you to kind of come out of the shell and start talking about ill health. I think that one of the things that when we started the Institute was that COVID coincided at the same time. And I said, oh my God, how are we going to do this? And the silver lining was people started talking about mental ill health, same time as the COVID, because they realized that everybody is vulnerable, right? And so it's becoming a normal thing to talk about, and it is something that can be fixed. But most importantly, we need to talk about it. So this forum was designed so that men, you don't suffer in silence and look for help. And there are all kinds of help from any, be it a religious house, be it educational facilities, being clinics, being community clinics. There's a lot of resources that'll help you.